Hello, I'm Soycat, and Austria has a surprisingly stable security situation. They are a landlocked nation, but this means they need no navy because they have no access to the sea. They're a neutral country that's not a part of NATO, but their security is still looked after by them because they're surrounded by countries who are, and this is perhaps a good explanation for how they've ended up in a situation where they have a political crisis that's been going on for 5 months, where they've had no government for that time because the biggest party that won was their populist right party, the furthest right party in the Austrian parliament. They won the largest number of votes and the largest number of seats, but despite that, they've been unable to form a government since that election all the way back in September. This is a situation which is probably recognizable to anyone who lives in Europe because the Freedom Party of Austria, they call themselves Österreich, so FPO, the FPO won the largest number of seats, but in a European election, you need to have the majority of seats to actually pass legislation because otherwise everyone could vote against you, and so you need to have, in other words, multiple parties working together. Coalitions are very, very standard across Europe, but this is a problem where the two biggest parties, the two more traditional parties of government, both won substantially fewer seats than the FPO. And so you have a situation where the only realistic form of government is for two of these three parties to come together. And so how has that attempt been going? Well, you might be able to work that out pretty poorly. To put this as simply as possible, the two biggest parties, this is the populist right, FPO, and this is the centre-right, OVP, and then this is the centre-left, SPO. They might come up later, but the two biggest parties, they are both on the right side of the spectrum, have both tried to form a government. The OVP tried to form it with the Social Democrats and the Liberal NEOS, and then they tried a different coalition possibility with just the Social Democrats, but both of those efforts collapsed, and that led to only one more functional way to make a government, and so the Freedom Party were tasked with making a brand new government, and their only realistic coalition partner was going to be the OVP. And so what happened there is they believe they made huge concessions to the OVP, but they weren't willing to make certain compromises because they're the largest party, and they believe that their agenda is there for a mandate, whereas the OVP said in response, all we wanted to guarantee was the absence of Russian influence in Austria, and that Vienna would remain a reliable partner to the European Union. And so given that they could not find a compromise, what had to happen was that the Herbert Kickl, who was the potential chancellor, the leader of the populist party, he had to come out and say that he had to come out and say that with regret that he is not going to be able to form a government, and he did not take this step without regret. That's not the same as saying with regret. He's just confirming that he doesn't not have regret. But anyway, he said that he's going to give up the mandate to form a government, and so after 5 months without a government, now all of the parties have confirmed we cannot do it, which causes a political crisis. Indeed, if you want to dive into it more, the Austrian coalition talks have fully collapsed, and so what do you do now? Well, the answer is Austria does have a political system where you vote for the chancellor. By the way, they've had so many chancellors since 2016. Something about that date all across Europe, you can see like 1 leader, 2 leader, 3 leader, 4 leader, 5 leader, 6 leader, 7 leader, 8 leader, 9 leaders, 10 leaders. They've had more leaders since 2016 than we've had years. Although you could argue these two guys are the same people. It's similar situations to what's happened in the UK. 1 leader, 2 leader, 3 leader, 4 leader, 5 leader, 6 leader. Basically, we're having a lot of leaders switching over because the world is going through a bit of a different political time. That goes without saying. By the way, you might know this guy. He's one of the most fascinating politicians in Europe. So he was the first party to breach the rule of not working with the populists in Austria. They formed a coalition government, and he was the youngest leader in the world, I believe, at the time of him being elected. 21 years old, if I've done that maths correctly. I don't think I have done that maths correctly. I think it's 31 years old. Anyway, the important thing here is he's one of the youngest leaders, and also he's got that weird situation like a Emmanuel Macron thing where he's married his teacher. Super, super interesting person. Also had a very scandalous collapse that led to him not being allowed to be the leader anymore. And then he won the next election and formed a coalition with the Greens. Again, very wild for centre-right and Green parties to work together. Basically, Austria has to do a few things right now. One of those things is they can say, okay, new elections. Let's go back to the people, let the people decide. The other thing is a minority government. You can let the any party, but specifically you'd probably say the Populist Party, you let them have a government, but on every issue, The reason it's not a stable government is on every issue, they need to get at least another 35 people from other parties to agree with their stances. In other words, it's like a coalition, but on an issue-by-issue basis. That can be unstable, so it's not always preferred. You could have a government of experts that temporarily steps in, although probably not preferred by the populist parties, or you could have another attempt to form a government be forced by the president, and they're going to talk with the parties and work out which of those needs to happen. And yeah, it presents a bit of an issue because if you look at the Austrian political spectrum, again, this is not the worldwide political spectrum. There's no extreme communists or extreme the furthest right people you can imagine. If you want this to represent the world, we could just keep drawing new lines and make it even less useful if you want to. But we're not. We're representing just Austria here. These are the basic positions of the 5 parties. You've got the furthest left party, the Greens, and the centre-right party. Again, the fact that a coalition could be formed here is kind of nuts when you think about the political spectrum, and it shows that there are some ways in which this is really three-dimensional, not two-dimensional. But basically, yeah, the biggest, the coalition that tried to form first was these 3 parties here. They are broadly center-ish, but that didn't work. And then the next logical combination was these 2 here. But once you've tried these options, then you really only have to run into stuff like this, which is going to get really, really weird after that, right? Like, you can do it. It has been done from the other side. But if you can get these parties to agree, is going to be an entirely different issue. And so within a 5-party system, Austria does have a lot more than 5 parties, but they have a fun rule where you need at least 4%. It's like the Germany system. It's something they do. I said it was to prevent extreme parties. I want to clarify. It's to prevent party fragmentation. If you want to have more in other words, you could have a bunch of tiny centrist parties, but it's to stop coalition talks being too complicated. Now with only 5 parties, you only ever need at most 3 of them, right? Like, mathematically, you can never need more than 3 parties together, and so that is a stability thing for government. But in the current situation, you can see that it hasn't caused any stability, and so what's going to happen now? Well, that's the interesting thing, isn't it? Because if they hold new elections, what is interesting to me is that if you look at the FPO, they are actually going to win those by an even larger share. In other words, they would come back to coalition talks with an even stronger mandate, and so in their minds, yeah, let's have an election, let's show what the people really want. Whereas the other parties are probably a bit more of a fan of, okay, what if you have a minority government and we'll keep you in check that way? Or what if we, actually can last minute form a coalition talk of just, again, there is if you view the political spectrum not as being left or right like this, but instead as being populist versus not, then you'd start to see that there's a huge, let me try and do this. If you see it as populism versus not, then you get a situation where it's like a spectrum looks like this maybe. We need more space in this diagram, let's move it over there. Then you get a spectrum like this, and it's like, well, wouldn't it be better to work together over here with less distance between us than to have to draw the giant line over to there, where they're apparently pro-Russia and whatever else? The point here is that is what is going to have to be worked out in Austria, and I want to talk about something because I caused some controversy with my German election video, but the populist right are rising across Europe. You can call them the far right if you want to. The parties which are to the right of the traditional right-wing parties, they're rising all across Europe. In the UK, they just, for the first time, they're the top off a voting intention poll, and realistically this is an outlier, but the fact that they are neck and neck with our major parties in a country where we traditionally don't have coalition governments, that is kind of nutty, right? It's, at least it's very shocking. The similar thing happened in the Dutch election. They don't have a 3% rule, and this is what happens when you don't. They have this many parties. Getting coalitions to work is really, really tricky, but here's the situation they have anyway, right? So the PVV won this one. They are the Party for Freedom, the right-wing populist party. They won by a substantial amount, kind of showing that there is this right wave across Europe. Hungary's leader, Viktor Orban, like a lot of people have a lot of feelings about him, but he also won an even bigger majority after his most recent election. So the right, and particularly the populist right, is rising all across Europe, and I think a lot of people look at this and go, well, I guess the only answer is to deepen in our left-wing view. But I think that this is the interesting thing about political systems, is that if you are going to have a democracy and you are going to have parties represent people's views, you can continuously try and get further away from those people's views, and you will be punished by the voters if you try to do so. If you keep getting further away from what people believe, then fewer people are going to vote from you. If you believe in the concept of democracy, then when the people say, yeah, we are very much against immigration, which is largely what Austria seems to be voting more and more for, then you need to work that into your plan. So if we look at Denmark, unlike the rest of these countries, they they actually have a huge majority, or not majority, because again, a similar share, a vote share to that of the Netherlands, where out of a 15-party system, they have one party winning like a quarter of the vote. The similar thing has happened here in Denmark, and how has this happened? Well, it's the Social Democrats, the center-left party there. They have won all of this by incorporating populist rhetoric. They can still do their center-left stuff, so they have all this talk about how we want to really make sure that we fight poverty and inequality and, pretty traditional left-wing values, but also we want to make sure we deal with irregular migration while strengthening resilience towards climate change. You can say 3/4 of what you agree with and what you believe is so dogmatically drilled into you that you can't do anything else, but you also need to deal with the other stuff, and if you don't deal with that other stuff, people will eventually vote you out. Denmark has been doing surprisingly well at having, if you are someone who's on the left of the spectrum, the reason they are doing well is because of the fact that they are saying this stuff about, they're doing their left-wing values, but then also they're saying, yeah, I think the goal should be zero asylum seekers. I think that actually we should do a great, this is some shocking rhetoric here, but they said, what I thought was really interesting is the idea that we must be careful that not too many people come, and also he says that the government needs to acknowledge that we're not asking for enough of foreigners. We've been letting people in without asking for anything in return, and in a very generous welfare system, that doesn't work. If people don't contribute to the system does not work, and this is the thing that I think a lot of Europeans probably could do pretty well from learning from. And if you are someone who dislikes the idea of, anti-immigration rhetoric, if you think, why can't the whole world just live here if they want to, then yeah, that sucks, right? But if you realize that your view is out of step with your country, you have two options. Either you implement the views your country has, or someone else will. And I think that's the weird thing that's I don't know why that's a controversial view that will get you called the N-word, the one you're allowed to call people on the internet if you disagree with them. Not the other one. But the truth is that all the people in Austria have been saying for a while now, too many people are coming into our country, they're coming into our cities, and I would be happy if they just went back to Styria. I'm sorry, Austrians. I know that joke doesn't work in your pronunciation of this place, but ever since I learned that there's an Austrian state that's just Styria with a T, I've been looking forward to doing that, and so this whole video has been worthwhile to me. I hope that you found it to be useful to you, because that is the situation in Europe right now. There is a rise of anti-immigration, and the only question is who is going to take people's views on that. Is it going to be the center-left, left-wing parties, or is it going to be the populist right? Because the answer of no one taking it seems like it is not really an option. But yeah, with that said, that's just my views on this, of course. I hope you found this video to be useful, and I hope that I'll see you for the filler video tomorrow, because it's the weekend. See you then. Second channel, don't care. Goodbye.